here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. Today, our special program on the 50th anniversary of the historic moon landing of the Apollo 11 on July the 20th, 1969. The lunar mission took astronauts more than 300,000 kilometers away from the Earth to its closest neighbor, the brightest celestial body in our night skies. Before we get down to our discussion, take a look at this and let's relive the moment when Neil Armstrong set foot on the lunar surface.
It was one of the biggest TV events in history. An estimated 650 million people around the world tuned in as American astronaut Neil Armstrong made lunar history.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The first man to step on the moon 109 hours, 42 minutes after the Apollo spacecraft left Florida, a journey powered by Saturn V. About 400,000 people worked on the lunar project. Engineers, coders, scientists, mechanics, doctors, tailors. But it all started with one man's vision.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The moon landing was a defining moment in the Cold War space race between the U.S. and the USSR, which started in 1957 when the Soviet Union sent the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, into space. The space technology that led to Apollo 11 was not only a technical feat, but also a bedrock of practical innovation. In 1972, NASA sent its last batch of moonwalkers with Apollo 17, and no manned mission have returned since. But the U.S. Space Agency recently said a program called Artemis, named after Apollo's twin sister in Greek mythology, is underway. They plan on putting astronauts on the moon by 2024 and use it as a training ground for Mars exploration.
For more on the 50th anniversary of the moonwalk, we have in Washington, D.C., Amitabh Ghosh, the chair of the Science Operation Working Group for the NASA Mars Exploration Rover mission. And in Rome, Italy, we have Giuseppe Riboldi, who is the president of the Moon Village Association. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Congratulations, first of all, to both of you, because it's an achievement that many have been working hard behind the scenes. So tell us about how that mission actually impacted your professional career. Mr. Ghosh, you go first briefly.
So, I was very young. I was actually not born. But I think what the lunar landings did is, if you talk to the older people, if you talk to my grandmother, nobody could even think that man could go to the moon at that time, when there were no sophisticated computers. The engineering was much less developed. How did they do it? And they changed the vision of mankind. Mankind never thought that they would be on another planet or on the moon. They would be restricted to Earth. The adventure was going to Europe, but here there was one man actually walking on the moon.
Yes.
So it changed the way that
what is it like for you
themselves.
Personally? I mean, you are certainly in the field. How is that achievement 50 years ago having an impact on your choice of career? Very briefly, sir.
So, when I went to graduate school in the United States, I looked at moon rocks under a microscope. And I thought, the mysteries on Earth have been already studied. So I should really look at some other mysteries which are still to be discovered. And that's what fascinated me. And that's how I ended up working on Moon and Mars. And
well, you're currently working on Mars, but Mr. Riboldi, to you, you are working about the moon all the time. So what about that event? What do you make of the impact of it?
First of all, ni hao.
Ni hao.
So nice to see you again. The impact for me was, of course, major. But you know, I started to be involved in the moon since I was 9 years old. So for me, the moon landing was a confirmation of what I had hoped since I was a little kid. So it was really a very exciting moment. Everybody which was not interested in space became interested in space. As for my personal experience, this gave me a further push, if I needed, to go towards scientific education, engineering. And so was the same for many other people.
Right.
So
we all have our moment in a way in terms of how the Apollo 11's landing on the moon, whether we experience it personally or not, because I was born much later than that, but that was quite a dramatic moment for every human being. But what does it mean, its legacy today, Mr. Riboldi? Shall we go to the moon now? What was actually the legacy of 50 years ago?
I think the legacy is about, very strangely, about Earth. Because basically when the Apollo went 50 years ago, as we all know, went for political reason. And it was not sustainable, and so it was stopped. However, the legacy, which many of the people still remember after 50 years, is the view of Earth from the moon. And this was the first time that really humanity took, let's say, note of the fact that we are a very small planet in the universe. You all know that this was the start of the ecological movement. So the biggest legacy, strange enough, was not so much on the actual moon itself, but how the moon relates to the Earth. So this was really the major legacy. Of course, there's been also technology, and there has been a lot of other, let's say, effect of going to the moon, economics. But on the cultural point of view, on the impression point of view, this is what the people remember most.
Certainly, we remember that dearly. Mr. Ghosh, to you, what was the legacy of 50 years ago? Scientifically speaking, what it has left with us, even though it was quite a leap forward in a way, and therefore cannot be repeated later in the year, but what was it meaning for all of us?
So I think there are 2 or 3 legacies, I would say. One is we are not restricted anymore to Earth. So that in 1969, we realized that the human race does not have to be restricted to Earth. Second is, I think, we realized mankind was really capable of pulling off very complex engineering tasks. So right now, we have forgotten how technologically challenging this is, to go from Earth to moon, to through multiple stages, landing on the moon, taking off from the moon, coming back safely. Huge deal. And that was possible, and so it showed that we could, as humans, take on very complex engineering tasks. The third legacy is, at the backdrop of these space missions, enormous engineering human resources were created. Some of the discoveries, so this engineering human resources went on to do discoveries in other fields. And some of the discoveries which were created, done for the lunar program, went on to have real effects in life, which like the pacemaker.
Yes. So what exactly are some of these discoveries and inventions, and later how it has been adopted for our daily lives rather than just serving the astronauts? Mr. Ghosh, can you be just a little bit specific and brief at the same time, sir?
Right. So you know, we call it in NASA, we call it the NASA offshoots, and we have a whole website. So there is a constant string of innovations which happen primarily to benefit of space mission, and then it goes on to benefit life on Earth. And so here I would say
For example, can you be specific? For example, what are those?
Like the pacemaker, like the Velcro, like light-weighted materials used in space. Like the CCD camera, the digital camera, right? Before that, there was the film camera. A lot of people don't even know. Exactly. photography used to be on film, right?
But
And
also,
the CCTV
on the other
camera was
hand,
perhaps
but also on the other hand, Mr.
Yes,
Ribaldi, we have seen politics play a very important role in the last mission to the moon by the human being. Now, how do you make up the role of politics in that mission, and how should it be now, Mr. Ribaldi?
I mean, the role of Apollo from the political point of view?
Yes.
Well, Apollo was basically a political mission. It was basically announced by Kennedy, as we all know, in the famous speech, and it was a challenge for the nation. We should not forget that when Kennedy made this famous speech of committing to the moon, the United States had just launched a suborbital flight a few days earlier. So the amount of work that needed to be made to put safely and get it back a man on the moon was something staggering that hardly anybody believed that that was possible to be achieved. So the challenge that Kennedy put forward as a major political challenge for the system of Western versus the former Soviet Union was the most important event. And so Apollo, it is a political program. It has been implemented as a security program because of the policy priority. It had priority on all other equivalent programs, and so the whole nation was behind to really go forward and land on the moon before the end of the decade.
Now, when you think about it in reflection, Mr. Ghosh, is it the best way to do things? Now, we also see geopolitics these days in the world, but the question really is, should that play a pivotal role in advancing technologies, and how much will those technologies be used for real people? Mr. Ghosh.
Okay. The first part is, politics, I think, is inescapable. If there are three people, there is going to be politics. And two is, it has to be, it has to make sense to everyone, right? I mean, so everyone has to kind of, in the country, has to feel that this is something that is worthwhile doing with their taxpayer dollars. So at some level, you need the support of the public. And the answer to your second question is, I think space missions are hugely beneficial to motivate us, to train the next generation of scientists and engineers. I think there's a huge motivation factor here, this is something which makes humans put in their best foot forward and try to do the best that they can. So it's a very huge deal, and it's a very huge, think of the astronauts who went, it's a very huge stretch in your spirit,
Certainly.
We all look back and think it's so cool, but they might not have come back, right? So they are taking, you and I, when we come to our jobs, there is no life risk, but the astronauts had a life risk.
Yes, indeed.
So,
that's part of their job also, the nature of their job as well. Mr. Ghosh and Mr. Ribaldi, stay with us because we're going to continue our discussion about this. And you are watching World Insight. We'll take a short breather. More on the 50th anniversary of the moon landing and the space milestones achieved since then, right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Program coming to you live from Beijing. 50 years ago, Neil Armstrong indeed took one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Since then, many strides have been made in moon exploration. China aims to land astronauts on the lunar surface by next year after landing a probe on the moon's far side. India plans to use a massive rocket to send people into space by the year 2022. Russia's working group on a new spacecraft to send to the moon by 2028. The Japanese space agency is on a mission to build a rover that will carry astronauts across the lunar surface. The private company SpaceX is building a starship to take humans directly to the moon. Space is indeed the final frontier to boldly go where no one has gone before. Look at that, fascinating. For more on the anniversary of the moonwalk, 50 years already, we have in Washington, D.C. once again Mr. Ghosh from NASA. Meanwhile, we also have from Rome, Mr. Riboldi, who is from the Moon Village Association. In London, we are joined by Marek Zabart, Professor of Geodesy at the University College London, and in our Beijing studio, last but not least, Yang Yuguang, Professor at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation, also Vice Chair of the International Aeronautical Federation. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. A greeting to all of you once again on this anniversary. It's an achievement of human being. But the question comes now, whether it should be the Mars or the Moon. We've already seen different plans. So, Mr. Yang, briefly from you, what do you think?
Well, for all space-capable nations, either U.S. or China or Russia, sooner or later, we should go to Mars. I mean, a manned Mars mission and also a permanent base on the Martian surface. But of countries like China and Russia, we have not been to the Moon before. We should go to the Moon first.